So welcome everyone. My name is Daniela Vintila. I'm the chair of this CCPR standing group on migration and ethnicity, which is a group that, as you know, I coordinate together with other colleagues. We have, okay, my screen is moving all the time with new colleagues joining. We have in the coordination team, we have Elena Wistaler, Sebastián Pieres, Nava Shahariar, and Roberta Perna, and some of them will be joining shortly as well. So as you've seen, our webinar today will focus on, I would say, a very timely topic for this electoral year, namely the impact of parties abroad on migrants' political engagement in origin countries. And to tackle this topic today, I'm very, very pleased to welcome our two speakers, Sergiu Gherghina and Sorina Soare. I'm sure that all of us in this group are very familiar with their work. Both of them, as you know, are leading experts on this political link between migrants and origin countries. So Sergiu is associate professor in comparative politics at the University of Glasgow, and his research focuses primarily on the interplay between migration, political engagement, party politics, and also democratization. And Sorina is associate professor in comparative politics at the University of Florence in Italy, and she has also significantly contributed to this scholarship in our field, thanks to her work on transnational political participation, party systems, but also post-communist parties. So today, Sergiu and Sorina will present some of their latest research that they have been conducted on the impact of perceptions of parties abroad among immigrant communities. And in doing so, they will focus more specifically on the Romanian case. So Sergiu and Sorina, thank you so much for having accepted this invitation to share your ongoing research with our standing group. As we discussed, you will have about 25 minutes, half an hour for your presentation, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I'll be the one presenting, and then Sorina will answer most of the questions. Apologies for my voice. It's just been like this for 6 days. It's probably a virus going around. In case you cannot hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try to speak up, or I'll try to adjust. So as Daniela mentioned,
it's working well, just to say that we see the PowerPoint and we hear you perfectly fine. Thank you.
Thank you, very kind. I'll try to speak as clear as possible and as coherent as possible. Thank you very much for inviting us to share some of the first findings of our study. It has been a survey that this is a survey that has been conducted in 2022, and we started exploiting some of the results. Today, we're going to look at something a bit narrower than what we sent in the title last week, because we spoke initially about engagement in the country of origin. But meanwhile, we decided to narrow it down, because this will be also the topic of a paper that we will prepare very soon for a special issue. And in that sense, we are interested in seeing the impact of parties abroad on migrants' perceptions of representation. Very timely topic, because we have an electoral year in many countries, both at European level, at local, and at national level. And migrants have voting rights in the country of origin. Many migrants have voting rights in their country of origin at all 3 levels. So in that sense, we were extremely interested in the representation. The research gap from which we started referred to an unexplored link between what is going on with migrants in terms of representation. So the starting point was that the voters abroad, or the emigrants, are an important component of the electorate in their country of origin. Increasingly so, numbers show that millions abroad are currently voting in various types of elections. At the same time, we know that political parties from migrants' country of origin set organizations abroad to mobilize these votes. This is a process that has happening massively throughout Europe, but it is valid for other parts of the world. So in that sense, there is extensive evidence that these political parties try to encapsulate their vote. But it is unclear what happens beyond voting, because there is a lot of research looking at how political parties mobilize citizens abroad to vote, how they mobilize them eventually to protest. There have been some works on that topic as well, but we do not know what happens beyond that, and with the idea of representation. Do these people abroad actually feel represented in the politics of their country of origin? Because if they don't, what's the point of voting? What's the point of trust of making an effort to vote for these parties? So in that sense, what we try to do is we try to address this gap in the literature and try to explain it to answer the question: what explains the migrants' perception that parties abroad represent their interests in the country of origin? Because that's a vital function of political parties, to aggregate and represent the interests of people. And in this case, as a person abroad, you should feel that your interest is somehow represented in the country of origin, because of course these parties from the country of origin cannot represent your interest as a migrant in the country of residence. So this was the broad question from which we started. Based on the existing literature, we derived four main hypotheses. The theory took us in the direction of four main hypotheses. Two of them are related to parties and what they do, and two of them are related to major characteristics of migrants. So one of them is the first is the high activity of parties abroad. The second is the trust that migrants have in political parties. The third one are the strong ties with the country of origin that migrants develop over time. And the fourth is the political interest in the country of origin landscape. So, of course, some of these may sound extremely intuitive, but we will see that the findings are not so intuitive. So, to begin with the first hypothesis, we know that parties abroad are elements to connect extraterritorial communities, the communities of migrants, to national politics. Plenty of studies. Some people in this virtual room have conducted research on that, so I'm not going to develop the topic further. And what we know is that these institutions, these organizations, the political parties, they foster the in-group connections and provide symbols of identification and loyalty. And as a result of this, there is a certain element of party service and efforts that make them more valuable. So in a nutshell, we would expect that the more these parties undertake activities during elections, between elections, the more migrants perceive them as being active, the more likely it will be that they perceive to be represented in the politics of their country of origin, because they will feel that the service and efforts are at a high level and they fulfill the functions that we covered earlier on. The second hypothesis is the trust in political parties, and it's pretty straightforward, right? If you trust an organization, very likely you would also feel that that organization represents you. Parties are key institutions to aggregate and represent interests. These are their basic functions, and in that sense, it is important to add that in many countries, party politics is the only game in town. It means that independents are quite rare in the governing process. So in that sense, the parties have the upper hand in the entire process. So in that sense, trust in parties is likely to be associated with support for their functions. And the straightforward hypothesis is that high trust in the parties from the country of origin enhances the perception of their representation. Now, moving on to the characteristics of migrants, we would expect the strong ties with the country of origin to enhance this idea of feeling represented in the politics of the country of origin. And the sort of literature in which we embed this is related to the transnational political activities, which are often driven by ties with the country of origin. So, of course, the transnational political activities are behaviors, but we thought that for attitudes, because feeling represented is an attitude, can also be driven by similar ties. At the same time, we know from the literature that strong ties can augment the attention paid to what parties abroad do. So in that sense, you have strong ties, you pay attention to what the parties do, and then there is a higher likelihood to feel represented. And at the same time, once you have strong ties, you may also develop social networks in the country of origin. I mean, strong ties mean social networks in the country of origin, and those people are likely to keep up to date the migrants about what is going on, how they're, what is the discussion in the country of origin about the voters abroad, that sort of thing. So in that sense, we would expect that strong ties with the country of origin enhance the perception of parties' representation among voters abroad, among immigrants. Now, the final hypothesis is related to political interest, and Campbell's 1960s has already identified political interest as a key predictor for political participation in general. However, there is further research showing that political interest is a very strong predictor of perceptions of political representation. And political interest has important effects for acknowledging the idea of representation across territories in various settings. So not only relative to the migrants, but in general relative to the broad population. And for specifically for migrants, this idea of political interest can drive a symbolic reconstruction of their community of origin, in the sense that if they have an interest, they start discussing about what is going on, and then you have a symbolic reconstruction going on in the territories. So in that sense, we would expect a greater interest in the country of origins politics to enhance the perception of parties' representation. In addition to this, we controlled for 5. We actually included only 5 in the model. But if you want the full model, it has 20 controls. We control for absolutely everything that you can imagine. I mean, not absolutely everything. I'm quite sure that at least one of you will come up with one that we didn't control for. But for the usual, we control for the absolutely usual suspects in the literature. What we did, we included in the model some unusual controls that we expected to have some effect on this. So, for example, perceived discrimination in the host country. So if you feel discriminated in the host country, you may wish to resort to what is going on in the country of origin, or sorry, country of residence. I said host. If you feel discriminated in the country of residence, you may feel inclined to resort to pay more attention to what is going on in the country of origin, and hope that things will be you'll be better seen and better represented there. The length of stay, which is the one of the usual controls. The number of migrants from the country of origin in the country of residence, so it's the social network of co-nationals in the country of residence. The consumption of media from the country of origin, and voting in elections organized in the country of origin. So we looked at political participation. Does political participation enhance? Of course, we checked if all these controls were highly correlated with the independent, and that was not the case. I'll show you some numbers in a minute. So these are the controls that we decided to include in the model, but we can swap them with many other controls that we control for age, education, country of residence, political system, that sort of elements for which we control. So what was the research designed to test this? We conducted a survey in June, July 22 among first-generation migrants from Romania. Romania is a crucial case for the study for at least 3 reasons. The first one is that it has a low turnout in elections of diaspora, and I'm talking here about legislative elections. Presidential elections are much more popular in diaspora, but generally speaking, for legislative elections, where you have the idea of representation happening, is quite low. There are several waves of migration which allowed us to see, looking at the length of stay, looking at other variables, allowed us to see if there was a temporal variation in their attitudes. And many do not have dual citizenship, which means that very often they may be inclined to look at the country of origin. Since they do not have dual citizenship, they cannot vote in the national elections of their country of residence, and then therefore country of origin is the option to be represented in parliament. And many do not have dual citizenship, resulted also in our survey. More than 85% do not have dual citizenship of those that we asked. That's 1,058 respondents with complete answers. We use the maximum variation sampling to get diversity on several key variables: gender, age, country of residence, migration, duration of migration, all those sort of things. The dropout rate was 25%, so roughly 1,300, 1,400 started the survey, but then 25% dropped out. So we include in the analysis only the complete answers, but we excluded the don't know and don't answer. There were some instances in which we had don't know to one of the questions, and we excluded that. Why we use the maximum variation sampling? Because it's no possibility to have representative sampling. We actually don't know how what is the profile of Romanians abroad. There is some data here and there about some sociodemographics, but it is only indicative, since they don't have to register. It's very difficult to get official statistics. But what we did after we collected the survey, we tried to see to what extent it matches the data that we have on the Romanian diaspora from recent years, and it is a decent match with the socio-demographics. So, for example, in terms of gender and age, we are roughly there. So various media reports, various NGO reports speak about the average age or speak about the gender, how many men, how many women, the occupation. And with respect to gender, education, and age, we were quite happy with what we observed. We can have a more thorough discussion about that if you want. But in general, this is the maximum variation sample that we aimed for from the beginning, knowing that we cannot actually get anything more precise than this. More than 80% of the respondents come from the 6 countries that used to be targeted, preferred targets of migrants. The rest of 20% of Romanian migrants, the rest of 20% come from 25 other countries. So we have 31 different countries in the sample, countries of residence. I'm not going to talk very much about measurement because for all the variables that you saw, the measurement is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to present only the 2 variables that are not very obvious. One of them is how useful are the organizations of Romanian parties abroad to represent the diaspora's interest in Romanian politics. I know that this may sound a funny question, but A, in Romanian it sounds clearer, and B, this is the sort of content that we came up after the pilot study. So we ran a pilot study. We did it. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. We did a pilot study. We ran a cognitive pre-testing, and this was the version that respondents agreed to the most because they found the most intuitive rather than asking them different versions of this question. And then the first independent variable for the first hypothesis, activity of parties, is how active are the organizations of Romanian parties abroad in your area of residence? Because of course we could not quantify objectively how active these organizations were. In the absence of ethnography, we cannot actually do this, so we had to ask people how active they were. So as I said, I'm just introducing these 2, but this is also a spoiler because it shows you what's the most significant effect in terms of area of representation. It's the first hypothesis. All our independent variables are Likert scales with 4 to 6 points. As mentioned, the don't know, no answer were removed. And we ran autocorrelation tests, and there are absolutely no problems. The VIF scores are below 1.0, and it's everything below 2.5 is absolutely fine. So I think the highest correlation was 0.3 between an independent and the control, but apart from that, everything looks pretty fine. Just to give you an idea, now we're moving on to results, just to give you an idea of how represented the Romanian migrants feel, it's not a very nice picture. 50% they consider very little. Initially in the pretest, we gave them not at all as a version, but then not at all and very little, they were a bit in doubt. So they said, okay, let's drop the not at all because some of them complained that, look, not at all is very subjective. And it's not that very little wouldn't be subjective, but there were some complaints. So that's why we stay between very little and very much rather than not at all to very much. So 50% perceive themselves as very little represented, with as little as under 10% feeling themselves very much represented. So there is, though, some variation. So like 50% are scattered through between little and much, little and very much. But it's important to keep in mind that many of them do not feel represented. So that's why taking into account this relatively little variation, any sort of effect that we would observe would be quite relevant. These are the results. We ran 2 models, one without controls with the main hypothesis in blue, and one with the controls in whatever it is, Bordeaux, red, whatever it's called, navy, red, whatever the name is. So what we observe is that the controls don't change anything, which is not surprising looking at the effects of controls alone. So none of them is statistically significant, very close to statistical independence. What you see in the graph are the odds ratios. So 1 is the statistical independence. So what we observe in the graph is that the activity of parties makes a big difference. So it's almost 2 times. I mean, people who perceive that parties are active in their area of residence, Romanian parties in their area of residence abroad, have a stronger feeling of being represented. So I'll just leave this for 5-10 seconds more for those of you who like to visualize this element, and I'll get to the conclusions, because we try to explain in plain words what these mean. So first is that the party activity has a strong positive effect on migrants' perception about representation, and this is important both for theoretical and normative and empirical reasons. I'll get back to that in a minute. Trust in parties and political interest have a positive effect, but significantly smaller. And when I say significantly, it's also in terms of level of significance. So activity of parties is significant at 0.01. These are significant at 0.05, and also the size of effect is smaller, as you see it here for second and fourth hypothesis. Ties with the country of origin and none of the controls have an effect, statistically significant or in terms of size. So that means a couple of things, normatively, empirically, for the broader study of party politics, migration, and representation. Political parties can shape migrants' perception about representation through activities both during campaigns and between elections. And the sort of theoretical implication for this is that parties can do something to shape people's perceptions beyond their discourse, beyond what they do in general during the campaigns, because most of the answers that we had about activity referred to activity between campaigns. We had 2 other questions in which we asked them, to what extent do you interact with parties between elections? And the correlation between that question and this question, how active political parties are, is 0.9, which means that when people referred to how active political parties are, meant between elections. So an active presence of political parties abroad could actually drive the feeling of migrants as being better represented in the politics of their home country. So it's not all about rhetoric, it's not all about ideology, manipulation, social media, as many studies argue, but it is also genuine presence in community and giving people a feeling that they are connected with their country of origin through these political parties. That's all from my side, and we'll look forward to listening to hearing your questions, comments, suggestions.